the first like scenario, which I think comes up a lot, and it comes up a lot with Coleman Associates because we work on things like instituting huddles or things about quick starts. And one of our principles is start all visits on time and make sure, we're very time-oriented people. And one of the things that will come up is staff members who've been arriving late. And then specifically, I think this comes up more, is just providers who've been coming late. And part of that has been because they're never had to be right on time before because patients weren't ready for them. So now we have to talk to them about coming in on time for these huddles. And so I guess, Melissa, I think it makes sense for us to start with like, what's the preparation for having this conversation? Because the scenario I want to make sure we demonstrate is we've already set the expectation that now we're doing huddles. Like, I think that we should say, just before we start this conversation, we've already said very clearly, because if you haven't done this, you can't have this kind of conversation of, we're going to be starting huddles. Here's why it's so important you arrive on time. The whole team is expected to be on time. We start at 8. We have to be done by the time the first patient is ready, which is 8:15. Starting Monday, we expect everyone to show up and be ready. And as our old teammate Laura liked to say, have your coffee drank, your coat hung up, like everything ready to go so you can huddle at 8. Yes. So assuming that's already happened, would you say we should go into this scenario, or is there other prep we need to do?
No, I mean, that's as long as you've communicated crystal clear to people, go for it. Where some people get stuck in is they get kind of bungled up around, well, did we communicate clearly to everybody? Well, if you delegated the communication and you didn't follow up, then that's another scenario we're going to get to, which is following up on stuff, right? Because if you bungled it and then you don't know, then your first conversation just simply has to be like what you might call sort of a verbal warning, or like, hey, like, we believe this was communicated. This is the expectation. No harm, no foul. Do you know it now? Mm-hmm, so the expectation is, and again, this comes out of Crucial Conversations, is just leaving with a clear plan. So every day I should expect to see you here in the exam room ready to go at 8 a.m. Yes. Okay. So I think you have to have that conversation first.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then say, so I'm the provider who, after 3 days, I've had a pattern of not coming in for each of those days on time. I've arrived at like 8:04, and then it was like 8:10, and it was getting just a little bit worse and worse each day.
Yeah. Yeah. So the trick is to always, when you see those things, is acknowledge too that it may not get perfectly like bell curve worse, or curve worse on that. It may be sort of, you get like some hope that maybe they show up one day and then they're late again, and they show up one day. So that's still a pattern. The pattern is it's inconsistent and you're unreliable. You don't have to wait for it to go like precipitously down to this like point of no return.
Yeah. That's a very good point, because I think as a leader, you look for the one day it's better and you're like, great, I don't have to address it. They corrected it. I think that's very common.
Totally. But that's bogus. Like, we learned in kindergarten how to figure out patterns, and that's a pattern. It's like, it doesn't have to be a bunch of things in a row. It can be like a variation, but it keeps happening. This variation, that's a pattern.
Yeah. Okay.
So in my mind, Amanda, like, if you were coming in late all the time or consistently, I would organize first in my head. Okay, how long has this been going on? Okay, so like, I know we talked to you about this last month, and it's been going on for the last couple weeks. And, I wouldn't bring somebody else into it. I wouldn't say, well, the team's complained about this, or so I would just, you're accountable to me. I sign the paycheck. You're accountable to me, or I do the performance review for you. So you're accountable to me. So I'd say, hey, I've noticed this pattern of behavior, and I want to talk to you about it. Can we pull aside for a few minutes now to do that? So again, acknowledging, first of all, that people are in a position to have a conversation. If someone says they don't have time for it right now, that can either be a legit thing, or it can be a way of distracting you, especially if they know that you're not likely to come back around. So I think you have to make sure that they're in a good position to talk. And then if they're not, reset a time and address it, but not until like next Thursday. Like, I'll be back in 45 minutes. You make yourself available. I don't know. So, I mean, would you add to that?
No, I think that's a good point is demonstrating, like asking them, do you have a few minutes to talk to me? And then it's also addressing, like, you're not going to do this right in the hallway in front of other people. You're like asking to like bring them aside and talk to them in private.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with
Exactly.
following up quickly and saying, like, great, well, when can you be available today, or, you know, in the next 2 hours, or something that is showing you will follow up. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
then I say, yes, I have time now. Like, yeah, I
Great.
have a few minutes.
Great. So then I would just go into what I've seen. We're noticing this pattern, and you maybe, first of all, acknowledge there's a change. It used to be that when you would show up at 8 o'clock, nothing was ever happening. It would be the smart provider to stay at home and spend a few extra minutes with their family and their kids because you probably charted for a couple of hours last night at home. So, but we're changing, and that we're changing, and I need you to be here on time. And then I would go into, and this comes from some of the Cy Wakeman stuff, the reality-based leadership stuff, like what's it going to take for you to do that? Or what's the issue, because there can be a variety of things that come up, and, maybe less so with providers than with other stuff, but it's like, are you having a transportation issue? Are you having a childcare issue? Like, what's going on? What's causing this issue? And make sure that there's not something else that could be solvable in a different way. Not that you're responsible for solving your staff's problems, but, if there's an obvious thing there. And then, in my mind, Amanda, I would go immediately to, do you understand that this is important? And make sure that they are not just being talked to. And that's where that crucial conversations thing about staying in dialogue. And do you think people get stuck there sometimes having that dialogue?
I think so. I think that I think it's a tough line in my experience. If I was responding to you, Melissa, and I said, yeah, I know this is a big deal, but my husband is not able to bring our kids to work every day. And where it can get stuck is when you're talking about some of the issues that the employee may be facing. And then to basically find that line between having empathy and compassion to help someone, but also like the reality of, well, your patients are starting at 8:15, and how to have that conversation. Because I think that can happen where I would say, yeah, but Mel, I've had to drop off my kid at daycare, and if my husband's not out the door, like I can't get out the door, and that's why it's been wiggly, and I really want to be on time for the start of my patients, but that's what's happening.
I love that example, Amanda, because that brings up exactly what the crucial conversations, which we use sometimes in HIP, talks about, which is agreeing on what the goal is. Is the goal to get this person to be here at 8 o'clock, or is the goal to get them to be here at the start of the huddle? Because I could go two different directions. I could say, you know what, if you can't ever do this, maybe we need to adjust your schedule. And in all candor, we don't really need a provider who works 9 to 6. We really need a provider who works 8 to 4. But if we need to make some short-term adjustment that can happen, let's talk about that, and we'll just, we'll reflect that in your pay, or something. There's got to be something in it for everybody. I mean, I'm losing ability to confidently cover the overhead of the clinic. So what is this person losing in this way as well? Or what's the trade-off? And if the goal is to get them here, then okay, if you get stuck in traffic, can you call in and commit to always being there? Can you give everyone your cell phone number? Can you invite people to call you instead of, feeling like irritated by it, or what could happen, kind of as thinking about what some possibilities are, but the bottom line is what you're walking away from that conversation with. And, as a manager, you're a problem solver. So walking away with an agreement that this person will either be here if something's up and they're calling in, or if the schedule no longer works for them, I'm sorry, it's always been 8 o'clock. It's just that nobody's fussed about it, before. Right. So we're fussing about it now. What's the transition period for you to find a nanny or a ride share service or something like that to drop your kids off? What's it going to take, and how long until you're going to get that in place?
Yeah, I think that's a good one to land on. I mean, Cy Wakeman would use the language like, given that your reality is you can't come in at such and such time because of your daycare, I think setting up again, the goal is that you are here for the first patient and our huddle. Given that that is all the reality, like, is it going to take 2 weeks to figure this out in 1 week? And can we
Right.
follow up on that to make sure it's now working? Or do we need to adjust your schedule for 2 weeks to make this happen? But I think the other trick that sometimes I fall, not trick, but the other like trap, I guess, that I fall into is carrying more of the load of the issue than the employee. I'm like
Totally.
classic do that as a manager. And so I think that language of, given that that's your reality, how can you, fix this? And when can I just follow up that this has taken place versus I'm going to go back and do 10 things and you're going to go back and do one as the employee. I think that's the tricky spot.
It is for sure the tricky spot. It's for sure the tricky spot, and you can't own it. Because again, it either is a pattern where there's going to be a zillion different things that get in the way of that, or it's just, or it's a short-term issue that someone can fix, but you can't own it any more than they can. And even the example I made of your language where you just said, can we follow up in a couple of weeks? I would be more firm about that. We'll make this adjustment, and you and I are going to follow up about this in 2 weeks, or we're going to follow up on this in 1 week. Because can is, would that work out for you? Would it be okay with you if we had
Yeah, no,
another
you're
accountability
absolutely right.
conversation? It's those little words that get you.
Absolutely. That's a really good thing to coach and to see in your own language. One thing you could do, and then I want to move to a second scenario that's kind of related and how you'd address it, is voice memo or record yourself or even film yourself like we're doing, have the conversation. Because sometimes someone thinks they're being really firm, like maybe I just did, can we follow up in 2 weeks? And then you could watch it yourself or have someone else watch it and say, actually, you were really wiggly just then. You just gave them the option instead of saying, we are following up on this in 2 weeks.
Totally. I mean, Amanda, you know this. We would watch these kinds of things all day and give people feedback because there's lots of those little words like maybe, or if you could just do there's lots of little phrases. It's like when you put it in like Grammarly, when you write it, Grammarly is like, no, that's unnecessary. No, that's not necessary. No, so like if you really strengthen your language, there's those kinds of things are all over the place. And they send mixed messages. It's like body signals, it's like you're saying one thing, but you're really saying something else. So your language is all softening up on everything, even though you're trying to be tough. And of course you get mixed results.